So I'm a member of the core team of the Uno platform open source framework, and I'm going to talk to you about what the Uno platform is, what it does, and how it can be useful to you. So first, let's set out the problem that Uno exists to solve. So if you want to build a UI application, you have to decide which platform or platforms you want to target. And these days, there are a lot of different platforms. That's in a nutshell the problem. So for desktop, you've got Windows, Mac, Linux, and mobile, you've got iOS and Android. And then, of course, you've got the web, which straddles all of those, but is very much a target platform in its own right. So each of those platforms has its own native UI framework. And each of those native UI frameworks has their own paradigm, their own APIs. Usually they're using different programming languages. So if you're developing an application that's going to run on multiple platforms, even if you happen to have within your development team the scope of experience and training to cover all of those native frameworks, it's still just a lot of work to write your business logic and your UI layout n many times for each platform. And there's a related problem that you may have an existing application that you want to migrate to a new platform. For example, you've got a legacy line of business application that's running on a local machine that you want to migrate to the web. And again, you don't want to rewrite it if you could help it. You would like to just be able to reuse as much of your existing code as possible. So the solution that Uno platform offers is to be able to write your application once using C# and using XAML markup, and deploy that single code base on every one of the platforms that I mentioned. So it's a .NET application on every one of those platforms. What Uno uses is the WinUI dialect of XAML. So XAML is a markup language for defining application layouts, originally created by Microsoft for WPF, back when WPF came out. But since then, it's been used for a number of different UI frameworks. We built Uno to use the WinUI, or formerly the UWP dialect of XAML. So Microsoft's modern XAML format. So the idea is that with Uno, you have a single code base, and it runs the same way on all targets, and it looks exactly the same on all targets. It's a free open source framework, and there's a rich third-party ecosystem for it. And I'm gonna dig more into all of those points. So to give you a more concrete idea what I mean, there's a snippet of XAML. So there's a grid element with a text block, just defining a basic text field inside of it. And there's a slider, which is a high-level control, which lets you adjust a value, and you can see it running in all of the platforms that I've mentioned. And you can see it looks the same on all of those. In the bottom right, you'll notice WebAssembly. Let me explain just what I mean by WebAssembly, because some people may not have heard of it, or some people may have heard of it before, but be a little unsure what exactly it means. So just quickly, WebAssembly is you can think of it as a low-level bytecode like IL or like Java bytecode that is built to run on the web. It's supported by all browsers out of the box without any plugins to install. And what it's for is to be able to run any language natively as a first party language inside the browser. So it opens up to having not just JavaScript as the native language of the web, but basically to use any high-level language of your choice as a native participant within a web page. And it runs inside of a security sandbox, the exact same sandbox that JavaScript runs in. So, I mean, on the one hand, that means you may not, you won't have access to all of the things that you would have access to if you were running a local app, obviously. But it also means that it's not going to go the same way of Adobe Flash, for example. It's not going to eventually be deemed an unacceptable security hole. So really, WebAssembly is the future-proofed, sealed, approved way of running code that's not JavaScript and languages that are not JavaScript inside our browser, including, for our purposes, C# inside of .NET. So I'm going to give you a very quick history of Uno platform, how it came to be, and where it got to where it is at this moment. So it was originally developed at Inventive, where I work in Montreal in Canada, as an internal tool that we used to build and still use to build mobile applications for Android and iOS, and for a short time for a Windows Phone as well. So when WebAssembly came along in 2018, when it got sort of stable releases and support in all browsers, and also when there was a official support for running the .NET runtime in WebAssembly first made available, we saw an opportunity there, and we added the browser via WebAssembly as a deployment target for Uno platform, and at the same time we made it public and made it open source. And since then, there's been a lot of developments. A number of third-party libraries have been ported or been created for Uno, and I'll talk a bit more about that. We've added several more target platforms since then, so macOS and Linux, as well as support for legacy Windows versions back to Windows 7. And we've also released visual themes that I'll talk more about as well, and a number of releases adding new features, new controls. We're adding new stuff just about every month in the stable branch. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's free and open source. You can use it. You can do anything you want with it, apart from sue us. So the way that we support a dedicated core team working on Uno is through the so-called Red Hat model. So we offer paid enterprise support for enterprises using Uno who are looking for extra support, be it in the form of building proof of concept apps, or prior debug or feature support, or just advice on what they're doing. So that's our sustainability model. And at this point, I'm gonna stop talking. Well, I'm gonna keep talking and get out of PowerPoint and show you a very simple Uno app that I'm going to create right now. So I'm in Visual Studio. To get the Uno platform templates, you just go to the extensions in Visual Studio and search for Uno, and you will find them. So that gives you the multi-platform app template here, as well as a template for creating Uno class libraries. So I'm going to create a new application. Pops up a helpful entry. So I recommend to leave this open the first time you run Uno and then come back and refer to it if you run into anything surprising. One thing to be aware of the very first time you create an Uno solution is that the XAML IntelliSense gets a bit confused by having a lot of different targets. So here in the solution view, all these projects are projects that build binaries for different deployment targets. So Android, iOS, etc. I'm going to unload all of these to start with, except the UWP target. And then I'm going to go to the shared code. So this project is where the actual app code all lives. So I'm going to go to the main page. Just going to close Discord. And here's my XAML layout. So if you used another XAML framework like WPF or Xamarin Forms, it's probably familiar. Even if you've used something like HTML to build UIs, it might look somewhat familiar. So there's a text block here. This is a very basic UI that's just going to give me a hello world text block. We're going to run this and then customize it once it's running. So right now I'm deploying on Windows. And I mentioned that Uno uses the WinUI dialect of XAML. And in fact, on Windows, Uno steps back entirely. And in fact, it's just a WinUI application, which means you have access to stuff like hot reload that's been implemented by Microsoft. So what I can do here is add markup on the fly, and it's going to get incorporated. So for example, if I change the foreground color to blue, it's going to be added right away, as you can see. So let's try something just slightly more intricate than a static text block. We're going to add a control that I like. This is coming from the Microsoft.ui.xaml controls library, aka the WinUI or WinUI2 library. So is it going to let me? Is it going to find that? Yes. Okay. So now I should be able to add a number box control. Let's give that a value so that we can see it. And I'm going to change this to a stack panel, which is a simpler panel element to lay out my elements on top of each other so we can see them all at the same time. So this is a number box. So what can we do with this? We can use data binding, which is a key XAML feature to bind the value of the text block to the number box. So we give this a name. My number box. We can then add what's called a binding on the text property of the text block. We can bind by the name of the element to the value property, which is just a property of the number. And let's see if it actually works. So if I update the number now, it's not going to work. I think it's going to make me restart the application. So we're going to see this running on Windows. Okay, now it's working. Okay, you see it. When I hit enter, it updates the text block because it's updating the data bound value. And I just want to show you one cute feature of number box is the accepts expression mode. So if I add this now, it's going to let me type in mathematical expressions and just hit enter, and it shows the value. It calculates the value of the expression that I've typed. So that's Windows, but that already exists. That's the WinUI framework. I'm going to show you now the same thing running in the browser. Okay. So it's building from the exact same code. And you can see I've got the same UI here. Again, it updates. The expression feature works the same way. This is actually code that was translated from C++, from Microsoft's code, to C# code, and it's running on for the high level parts of the number box control, and it's running on top of Uno, which replicates everything Windows is doing. So that's XAML running in the browser. So rather than spending hours playing with XAML, which I could easily do, let's continue with the presentation. So one thing that we will mention about Uno is that it's truly native. You get a native application from Uno. And what we mean by that is that it's built upon the native UI frameworks for each platform. So on iOS, it's using UIKit. On Android, you're getting Android views, view groups, etc. You get in the web page I just showed you, those were actual DOM elements that you were seeing in the web page. The one exception is Linux, where we're not doing that. We're instead rendering to the Skia rendering engine directly. But for every other platform, it's using the native UI framework. So you get a native application. And as far as where Uno platform sits with respect to other UI frameworks, it's at an interesting place where it's a native application, as I said, and that gives you stuff like accessibility, the way that the native platform does it. It gives you the behaviors that users would be accustomed to. For example, if you cut and paste text into a text entry field. But at the same time, by default, Uno makes the UI layout that you declare in XAML or in code look exactly the same way on every platform. So it does that because it's relying on the low-level parts of the native frameworks. So it doesn't use a native button control on Android or on iOS. It creates a button out of primitive components the way that Windows does in its control template. Of course, you can tell it to look differently on different platforms if you want to, but by default, it's going to be pixel perfect across all platforms. And in terms of customizing the visual style of the application, the WinUI API has a very powerful concept of control templating that you can use to make any control defined in your application look more or less however you want it to look with a few lines of code. So those are some of the XAML features that we support. Everything that you would expect to get. So templating, styling. There's conditional XAML. So as I mentioned, if you want it to look different on different platforms, you have ways to do that. You have ways to specify that a particular control should only appear on specific platforms, or a specific attribute should only apply to particular platforms. Animations, data binding, as well as X binding, so you can bind to functions defined in the code behind. Shapes, brushes, lots more. And a good way to see what's available there is to go to gallery.platform.uno. That's the website for the Uno gallery. So it's an application that we built with Uno, showcasing the features and the controls that are available. Uno doesn't just allow you to reuse the markup and the code that you write. It also lets you reuse images and to reuse string resources so that you don't have to define those multiple times for each platform. So for images, you just put all the assets that you want to use in a single folder, and Uno takes care of stuff, for example, like setting the right name for different assets to be used at different screen resolutions, which is a big part of getting an application to look nice across a wide range of device types. For string localization, for example, if you have, for example, multiple languages that your application is supporting, you can use the WinUI resource RESW format. You just stick your string resources in a single folder, and then Uno takes care of creating the platform-specific representations of those. So that just works across all platforms. In terms of control coverage, these are a sampling of some of the controls that are available. There are, I think, a couple of newer ones missing there. And I'm going to show you now an application that shows some of those controls in action. So this is the NuGet Package Explorer, which was made available, I think, a few months ago. And if you want to check it out, you just need to go to nuget.org. So I assume everyone here who's a .NET developer is familiar with NuGet. Let's check out the JSON.NET, aka the Gangnam style of NuGet packages, 1 billion plus downloads. And if we check the NuGet page, there's a link here, open in NuGet Package Explorer. So here we get a page showing a whole lot of information about the NuGet package that's generated by analyzing the actual contents of the package. You might notice down in the bottom left-hand corner a little badge that gives you a clue that it's built with Uno platform. So on the left side here, we've got various statistics about the package. Here in the top right, we can actually drill down into the libraries inside of the package. So this control here, focus on the UI here. This control is the tree view control, which was added, I think, a few months ago to Uno. ported from WinUI code. And then if we click on one of the files, here we get a view of information about the file. So here we can see all of the metadata references that DLL is pointing towards. And this control here is actually the data grid control from the Windows Community Toolkit. So the Windows Community Toolkit is an open source library of add-on controls for WinUI and for Uno that's maintained by the community with some help from Microsoft. So it's sort of a semi-official third-party library of controls. This is the data grid control here. So yeah, NuGet Package Explorer, pretty useful tool in its own right. Also, I think a great showcase of Uno. So, by the way, this was a desktop application that was created by Claire Novotny, originally in WPF, I believe. And Claire, as well as the Uno team, worked together to port the WF code to WinUI Uno code, and then to make it available here on the web, so you can use it straight from your browser. Okay, so carrying on. So, I mean, one thing you might notice about the NuGet Package Explorer that I just showed you, it's a bit gray. It's visually, it's kind of a standard out of the box line of business looking application, which is nothing wrong with that in this context, but you're by no means restricted to any particular look with Uno. So if you want to customize the visual style from the ground up of your application, the WinUI contract gives you the tools to do that. And if you're looking for something a bit more out of the box, that gives you a way to give your application a different look, there are several libraries available for you. So on the left on this slide is a Fluent UI style or design. So these are the visual styles that are included with WinUI and included with Uno. They're basically the default visual theme of Windows 10 and now Windows 11. And recently, in fact, just in the last week or two, with Uno 3.11, we released support for the latest version of the WinUI styles, which are the updated Windows 11 design style. In the middle there, you've got the material theme. So this is from the Uno material library, which is a third-party library. It's also free and open source. And that's built according to Google's material design system. So kind of the de facto design language for Android, and also used more widely as well. So if you want to use the material visual style by default in your application, you can install the Uno material NuGet package, drop a couple of lines of code into your application initialization file, and your entire app will look like a material design application. And the library also includes a few controls to help support the material design idiom, like a card control for displaying information. And on the right, there's the newest one, the Cupertino visual style, aka Apple's visual style. So that's also a library that we've created that's freely available, and you can drop that into your application in much the same way. And you're also free to mix and match those to use particular visual styles for only for certain platforms, or even to make it something for the user to configure, Uno makes it easy to do that. And again, if you want to see those different visual styles in action, the Uno gallery is the place to go. So you can check that out on the web at that URL, platform.uno/gallery. You can also get the Uno gallery application on Android and iOS to see what it's looking like on those platforms. And I think you can get it in the Windows Store as well. And as I mentioned, you can go well beyond that and customize the UI from the ground up. And to give you a taste of what's possible to do, these are all screenshots from working applications that are on the App Store that have been built by Inventive for different customers. And you can see those customers on the right. So as I mentioned, Uno's running on .NET, and that means that you've got access to a lot of libraries. For a start, you can use any .NET Standard 2.0 library across any platform. Since it's built to match the WinUI or UWP API, it means that a lot of existing code can run on Uno. So what that means is that we've seen a lot of third-party libraries being made available in the short time that Uno has been public. So if you're looking for control libraries, there's libraries from Syncfusion, from Infragistics, as well as the Windows Community Toolkit that I mentioned. Or if you're looking for presentation frameworks, there's a lot of options like Reactive UI, Prism, MVVM Cross, MVVM Lite. So, excuse me. So presentation frameworks that you may have already encountered if you've used other UI frameworks. So I'm going to spend the rest of the talk looking at some of the third-party libraries available. So one of them that I like is Uno UI Test. So we all know that having automated testing is pretty important for building stable and maintainable software. And if you're building a UI application, you would like to be able to do automated testing on the UI itself, which is not necessarily straightforward. So it's not too difficult to write unit tests that test your business logic, or that send queries to your database backend or whatever. But if you want to test what happens when a user interacts with the UI, then you sort of need some extra machinery, and that's what Uno UI Test provides. So it gives you the ability to write tests that interact with the UI in the same way a user would. So you can tap on elements, you can enter text, you can scroll, you can drag. So you can test what would happen when a real user, for example, tried to log into your app or tried to perform a particular flow in the UX. And that is running on iOS, on Android, and on WebAssembly. So under the hood, on iOS and Android, it's using the Xamarin UI Test framework. And the API closely matches Xamarin UI Test, in fact. And on WebAssembly, it's built on top of the Selenium open source framework. So that creates a headless Chrome instance and just sends all of the input to that instance. So you've got the ability to write tests and run them on multiple platforms on the CI to ensure that your UI is behaving exactly the way that you expect it to be behaving. So that's really nice. Skier Sharp. So I briefly mentioned Skia earlier. So it's a low-level rendering engine that's developed by Google. It runs pretty much everywhere. And Skia Sharp is the .NET wrapper for it, basically. And we've made with in partnership with Matt Leibowitz and Microsoft, we've made Skia Sharp available on WebAssembly, and we've also provided a wrapper so you can have a XAML canvas elements, which basically is a canvas for rendering Skia onto that you can drop into your XAML visual tree. So basically, the idea is that if you have some specialized application in your, a specialized need in your application where you kind of need lower level control over the pixels, or you need advanced like rendering techniques or filters or whatever, and you also need very high performance, then Skia Sharp is the way to go, and it integrates neatly with the rest of your app defined in XAML. So I mentioned the Infragistics controls library. So these are various controls that are available to render and visualize data, and these are actually built on top of Skia Sharp. And I'm just going to run a quick sample right now of one of those. So I'll close my demo and open the Color Explorer sample. So this was a very simple application that here we've got a picture explorer. This is a locally defined control. We can see it's taking a local image asset. And this is a XAML data chart. So this is one of the data visualization controls provided by the Infragistics suite. So I'm going to run it now. Run it on iOS, on WebAssembly. So I've got the image referred to by the picture explorer up the top, and if I drag my mouse over it, I'm not actually sure if you can see my mouse, but if I drag my mouse over it, basically the pixel under my mouse, what it's doing, if we look at the code for Picture Explorer, every time the pointer moves, it's basically just checking which color is under the pixel, and it's sending that to a buffer, an item source, and the chart on the bottom is rendering the results of that item source. So you can imagine this chart at the bottom might be showing stock exchange values or like temperature readings. Instead, it's just showing pixel values under my mouse. You can see, okay, if I drag over the green border, you can see that the green channel is coming up more strongly. And I'll just quickly show that running on iOS as well in the iPhone simulator. If it wants to run. Yes. So this is the same thing. I don't have pointer over events because it's a touch simulation. So, but if I drag the mouse, I can see the color channel coming in here, and it's exactly the same thing. So that's Infragistics controls running in C#, running across all platforms. And if you check out that link, it explains the licensing for the controls. I think they're currently free to use as a preview, if I understand correctly. One last thing I want to show you is the Uno playground. So this was built with Uno and it lets you play with Uno. So if we open a new tab, so on the left I've got basically a very mini IDE. I've got some XAML here. I can also define data. It's kind of a JSON blob if I want to test out data binding. So I can edit the XAML here. Classic, change the foreground color. And I can instantly see what I've got. So I can also change the data that's being bound to. And a couple of nice things. There's a bunch of predefined snippets that you can take a look at. And also a nice feature is that you can save any XAML that you define. You can save a URL for that and you can share that. So it's kind of a nice way to play Uno, and even a nice way of sharing samples quickly. So that's about all from me today. I want to ask you to, if you can, go to the platform.uno/prize draw. If you fill in the survey there, you're go into a draw for a chance to win a free subscription to the Introduction to Uno platform course on Udemy, which is a nice course from Christian Finlay. And if you're interested in Uno and you want to learn more or try it out, check out platform.uno. Go to the Get Started link. It'll give you everything you need to install, to get set up to run Uno and to build your first Uno application. If you want to reach out to us, we're on Discord. So go to platform.uno/Discord and look for us in the Uno platform channel. If you run into an issue, we want to hear about it. So GitHub is where we coordinate that. Or if you just want to start a discussion, we can do that on the discussions tab there. One last thing is we also offer, in collaboration with Microsoft's App Consult team, work on proof of concept apps. So if you're interested in that, or if you have any queries about the enterprise support side, then the info@platform.uno email address is where to go for that. So that's it from me, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.